Okay, we thank Erlene for our greeting this morning, and Sue Brown for the great goodies. Yeah, Bob said something about you didn't leave any of them at home for him.
He tasted it all.
Oh, he did. Well, you can add leftovers for him?
Not me.
No. Okay. Barb, do we have any visitors this morning?
Do we have any empty seats?
Pardon?
I did not see any visitors come in. I might be wrong, but I think we're okay. But we do have, we want to welcome Louise Kane back among everybody else. I think Louise has been gone for quite a while. And the Willises are back. The golfing circuit must be closed.
And Alice is here this morning.
I have a little story to tell of when we get to the thankful part.
It ought to be a good one. Okay, do we have any cares and concerns? Lucille.
Judy of Papa George had a car accident on Monday, and so totaled her car but hurt no one or herself. She blacked out, I suppose you would say. She was in the hospital a couple of days with pneumonia. She's at home now and doing what the doctor advised her to do, and so she hopes that she'll be back next Sunday. We'll see. But thank you for calls, for cards, your prayers, and she misses all of you. Now that's sincere. She asks about all of you when I talk to her.
Thank you. Ken?
Yes. Well, Ann came to visit us yesterday afternoon, and she's looking good and seems to be happy. And she has a note here that she asked me to read to the class. She says, "Beloved Contemporary Forum, thank you so much for the party last Sunday. It was awesome," in all in big letters, just like you are. I'm especially grateful to all of the committee, Al and Marion and Jen and Joe, Sam, Susan, Annette, Tom, Ruthie, Eleanor, and she stresses Bob for the wonderful photography. And then she says, if I missed anyone, please forgive me. Well, I want to stop and kind of add my own personal note here. I think all those people and others are certainly deserving of thanks for a very special day. But in all fairness, we have to especially thank Annette and Eleanor, because those two people, I think, were really the leaders of the. And she concludes by saying, I am forever thankful and honored by your presence for the beautiful orchids, which are doing very well, the heavenly cake, Where was that from, Eleanor? The lovely cards, the generous gifts, and the love which is eternal. Your servant and friend, love Ann. So this was a wonderful note. Thank you.
Good to hear. Has anybody talked to John Baylor this week?
Mary Beth sent flowers.
Pardon?
Mary Beth sent flowers to him.
But nobody's talked to him.
I talked to him the other day.
Don?
He's doing okay. He doesn't know when he's gonna stop it in here. I have a feeling he's improving. I talked to him several weeks ago. I have a feeling he is improving. But he's playing it very cautious.
Yeah.
I did. I received a card from John thanking me for the visit and for chicken and dumplings and pie. He said that he still had the pneumonia, and the card was written on, I think, Tuesday.
Okay.
So that's puzzling that he'd still have the pneumonia.
Yeah. The lung problem is not going to go away. Anybody else?
I do have a prayer request. PALS has two co-directors, myself and Norma Highlander. And Norma suffered a stroke on Wednesday morning. When she got up, she found out she didn't have any sight in her right eye. And she's still in the Seton Women's Hospital, but the doctors say it was really a minor stroke, and hopefully she'll come home. But she'll be doing a lot of rehabilitation before she's back to PALS. So anyway, keep Norma Highlander in your prayers. She is not a member of this church, but she is a loyal PALS volunteer.
Good. Joe?
Yeah. Well, I'm selling tickets today, and the good thing about these tickets, these are one way. The ones I sold a few months ago were round trip. So if you want a one-way ticket to heaven, here it is. Sign it up.
Good for any time?
No rainy day on that one.
Yeah. Are you going to tell us about Alice's?
Yeah.
Yes, I thought I might. First off, I wasn't charged for wife abuse. Alice can't hold up her hand, but she managed to not just fracture, but pulverize her wrists. Pieces. Well, she was going over to Judy Jones' house to take some books, and Judy didn't know she was outside, but she fell down on concrete. And you may recall, she just had her left knee replaced, so that opened wide open, and she bled profusely. Fortunately, a neighbor saw what happened to her. And they rushed over, knocked on the door, got Judy out, and got a big towel wrapped around her and tried to stop the bleeding until they could get to ER. So there's a blessing with everything. The blessing is Alice can now sign her name with her left hand. Anyway, she's doing great. I've got a few extra duties, but that's all part of the game. It kind of started with this particular sweater, because this is the combination I captured her with at the Methodist Student Center at UT in 1959.
Sounds like my boy girl.
Sounds good life stuff, huh? All right.
Century.
Okay. Is that it for the joys and concerns? All right, Jim, you had something.
Last week when we had the reception for Ann, you remember in the fall, our class voted to purchase the brick, and it's in honor of our teachers, Ken Armstrong and Reverend Dr. Ann Hagman, Contemporary Form Class 2017. We had it here. I don't know if any of y'all or some of you did not get to see it, so I picked it up this morning, and it'll be sitting right over here on the table. And if you'd like to look at it, this is from our class to our teachers, and thank y'all very much. I'm gonna put this down. I got some more information.
Yeah, I'm just looking on the floor, but I can't bend over.
That thing's heavy.
Where will it be? Where is it gonna be?
It's supposed to be in the learning tree whenever they get all of the bricks purchased and they're gonna put them together. They have not got them taken care of yet. Couple of things dealing with, if you noticed, if you went to First Church, if you hadn't, you go to Second Church, you'll see in there that there is a called charge conference this Thursday. And it's scheduled for March 1st at 6:30. Our regular administrative council meeting will follow. The purpose of the conference is to approve the construction of the parking lot on the lawn of the McKinney Christian Center. The conference will be held in the 1,000 rooms of MCMC. Now, I went and saw Eric immediately afterwards, and I said, now, Eric, is this a charge conference or a church conference? And he said, no, it's a charge conference. And so, with a little explanation and dealing, and also visiting previously with Dick, who is on the trustees, it is a charge conference because the church is not going to borrow money. The way it's going to be paid for, and the cost of it is about $136,000 plus some additional cost for some irrigation system, is going to be from donations from our congregation, and then let's assume, just for numbers, that we raised $40,000 and we still owed $100,000. Now, as you recall, last year we had an anonymous gift of $600,000 to the trustees, and they have set aside money for this project. So the church is not going to borrow money to do this project, and that's why it's not a church conference. Okay? Church conference is everybody that comes, if you're a member, you get a vote. Now, this is a charge conference. Technicality. Only admin council members will vote. You're welcome to come. You're welcome to express your opinion. Now, I represent the contemporary class and admin council, and I will be there. Now, I would like to know from this class, do you want me to vote yes to put the parking lot in or no? Those in favor of saying yes, raise your right hand. Just raise your hand to vote. Those against it, I will be there Thursday night to vote for it. Now, yes, ma'am.
How many parking spaces?
27, 25 regular and 2 for handicap.
Okay, it'll be right across the street over there. Dick is now on the trustees, so it's great we have somebody from our class dealing with the trustees. Okay, one other item, and Eleanor, if you'll come on up, Eleanor's going to bring you some information regarding the St. Patrick's Day party, which will be on Friday, March the 16th. The reason I'm going to make this announcement is that we will be charging $5 per person for that. It will be a potluck dinner, so you'll bring and it will be furnishing the drinks, etc. The reason for that is that we need to cover the expense of Ann's reception. Also, we have to pay a fee to the church because it's on a Friday night, and they have to pay overtime to the people to come in and set up for Sunday school classes on Sunday. So they'll have to come in on Saturday. Then also we'll accumulate a little extra money to help with some of the expenses of our Christmas party in December. So Eleanor will give you the information. There'll be information going out regarding that, but just that's the reason for the $5 charge is for us under the bylaws of our Sunday school class, and John Rayburn has some real strict idea about all this, says we cannot take any money out of our treasury to pay for parties. So we have to pay for them ourselves. So that's the reason for the $5. And thank you very much. Is there any questions? Does anybody have? Eleanor?
The date again?
She's coming right here.
Yes, we're doing a party
This is our first party this year. It's going to be on March 16th on the Friday night. And it's going to be a covered dish. And sure you'll be wearing the green, I hope. I'm going to pass this out, and it'll be for you to sign up if you can come. And then we'll just read the instructions at the top. It says, please print your name and check under the dish that you will wish to bring. So meat, salad, sides, dessert. So I'll pass it around, and as soon as we get the number of people coming, then we'll know how many tables to set up. Thank you.
Do not give us the $5 until the night of the party, okay? So just sign up and we'll collect the money when you bring.
Will we have another day to sign up? We don't have to sign up today, okay.
Okay, we had one birthday this week, Maya, but I don't see her here.
She's not here today.
No.
I've got a birthday tomorrow.
Sir?
My birthday's tomorrow. That was last week.
I've got to update my calendar. Thank
We'll
you.
celebrate it next week since you missed it last week.
I'll be on the tenth. Okay. Annette, I believe, has the prayer this morning, and then Ken.
I promise Ken, I'll talk real fast because we're getting a little bit of time, I'm afraid. This week I knew that it was time for me to have a prayer, and I put it all in reserve, knew exactly what I was going to do at the end of the week. But early on Wednesday morning, I awoke and found out that Billy Graham had died. And it just, I could not believe how quickly the world set on fire for that. But as I was looking at my computer, I went over a little bit, and Amazon already had the books to sell, and I had to go someplace else, and when I got home, they were all sold out. But I did do some research, and I was very glad to be at two of his, as he called them, crusades then. And some of you are the same age as me, almost. You probably have been to some of his services. And they were so very outstanding. My family and I would drive some distance to go. And maybe some of you are old enough to do that. But Billy Graham was named by Americans as one of the 10 most admired men in the world. And it was a record-breaking 59 times that he broke the record of Gallup poll. And his crusades of earlier, the first one was in 1947. The last one was 2005, and I didn't even know they went that far along. I think those were probably in some of the 185 countries that he worked in. And the first one was at Grand Rapids, Michigan, on September the 13th through the 21st in 1947. And 6,000, on the very first, 6,000 people came forward. And Ken, they gave them, to have something to depend upon, they gave him the Gospel of John to take home with him. And I thought that was interesting. And I'm not going to go all of this that's going on, but throughout his evangelism, he reached over 200 million people in more than 185 countries. And I'm not going to go through too much of this since we've run over time, but Billy Graham, of course, as you know, and if you open the paper the next day, on Thursday, if you open this Austin paper, you saw 2 full pages of his work in Texas, mainly with the presidents. He worked with 12 presidents, and also had a connection with Obama. And one thing, he had such great friends everybody was going to be his friend, but he was great friends with like the Queen of England and also Margaret Thatcher. And he was a really good friend of Martin Luther King. And Martin Luther King said, had it not been for ministry of my good friend, Dr. Billy Graham, my work in the civil rights movement would not have been as successful as it was. And that's quite a beautiful thing to hear. The quotes that, I'm not going to go through all these quotes that I thought were very interesting, but I'll hit a few. He has been quoted so many times, and there are about 40 really important quotes. But God has given us two hands, one to receive and the other to give with. And the next quote, when wealth is lost, nothing is lost. When health is lost, nothing is lost. When character is lost, all is lost. And quit beating yourself up. We live under the grace and do the best that we can. And there are many, many, many more here that are wonderful, but I'll skip down to some that the guys might like. Pardon me?
We need to end this.
Okay, well, let us have a prayer then. The quick prayer I can give then is the one that I went to. Tom and I hurried to the movie one night this week and saw 1517 of Paris. And in that I have a shorter prayer. In this show, in this movie, there are twice that this prayer has been read. It's not read, he says it by Spencer Stone, and it is the peace prayer of St. Francis. So that will be our prayer today. May you pray with me. Lord, make me an instrument of your peace. Where there's hatred, let me sow love. Where there's injury, pardon. Where there's doubt, faith. Where there's despair, hope. Where there's darkness, light. And where there's sadness, joy. Grant that I may not so much seek to be consoled as to console, to be understood as to understand, to be loved as to love. For it is in giving that we receive, it is in pardoning that we pardon, and it is dying that we are born to eternal life.
Amen. Thank you, Annette. No, thank you. Well, I certainly want to thank you, Annette, for that. I'm sorry that time was a factor there. In general, by the way, I think that these prayers should be limited to about 3 minutes. Ann and I often discussed suggesting that. We hated to, but that really should be the case. But I really appreciated your comments. Billy Graham was a great American, and his passing is certainly something to note. And as far as your prayer, that's absolutely one of the great prayers of all time. So thank you so much, Annette. I do want to comment that next week Jim Turley will be our teacher. Jim Turley, you know, is one of the outstanding members of our church. He is a United Methodist minister. In fact, he preached here just a Sunday or two ago in the 11 o'clock service. The reason he will be teaching is because occasionally, quite frankly, I need a break. Like right now, I am preparing for 3 lessons just prior to Easter. I'm calling it my Easter Sunday school lessons. And it just takes time. And so I just need a Sunday off to reload, if you will. We have a committee, Jim and Marion and Brenda and Zoe. And it is their responsibility, they ask for it actually, to get substitute teachers here and there whenever I indicate that I need a little break. So I really appreciate their work, and what a wonderful way to start this with Jim Turley. If at all possible, I hope to come because I'm very high on him. It really is good to see Louise back out here today. It just brought a smile to my face the minute I saw her, because I have really missed her. Well, when was it, Dixie? 2 or 3 years ago, we went on a vacation up to New England. When was that? Last year? Year before last. Yes, we went up and flew up to Hartford and then drove up to Western Mass and then came back down to Connecticut all the way down to Mystic, which was a charming little town. In the process, we went to Farmington. And the main reason we went to Farmington was that we wanted to see where our good friend Marion was brought up. And so we saw that. It was a beautiful little town, very pretty in fact. And they had a beautiful, beautiful old home there, something almost of a museum. That's really why we went. To enjoy that, and so we did. And so we, of course, had Marion in our hearts and thoughts when we were there. And then we went on back up to Massachusetts, to Stockbridge. Stockbridge, Massachusetts, of course, is where the Norman Rockwell Museum is located. And Dixie and I are big fans of Norman Rockwell, and of course, we went out and thoroughly enjoyed it. There was a huge crowd of people. He is obviously a favorite for the American people. And so we spent probably a couple of hours there because all of his paintings are displayed. And but one stood out, and it was a series of 4 paintings mounted on the wall, and they were called the 4 Freedoms. Now, in 1916, Norman Rockwell began providing cover illustrations for the Saturday Evening Post. And for the next 47 years, he produced 322 covers. And they're viewed as windows to America. That's the way they're viewed. I have a wonderful notion here from the great historian Paul Johnson in his book, The History of the American People. It may be my favorite American history book, and I do have several, but I really like his book. But he has written a little section on Norman Rockwell. He thinks he's one of the great Americans. Never ran for political office. You won't find him in a lot of history books because of that. But he was one of those great Americans that we all knew and loved. One of the things that we appreciated about him, according to this historian, is that he sang America. He sang America. And he praised America. And there was a sense of geniality about his paintings. By that, a smiling, pleasant, gentle, friendly, kindly quality, which according to this historian you will not find in any other artist of the Western tradition. So I thought that was very important. I would not be qualified to make that statement, but he was. So Norman Rockwell. Now I want to talk to you a little bit about the 4 freedoms. The 4 freedoms, those 4 paintings refer to the 4 essential human freedoms that were outlined by President Franklin Roosevelt in his State of the Union address in January the 6th, 1941. Now, I would have been 6 years old at that point, but at least I was around. And so his point was that these are 4 essential freedoms for every human being wherever they lived around the world. But he knew perfectly well that these freedoms were not available in much of Europe because of Hitler, and were not available in Asia because of Japan. Now, on August the 14th, shortly after his speech, really, just a few months, he was aboard a ship with British Prime Minister Winston Churchill. It was pretty well felt that the United States was going to be entering this war. And so he and Roosevelt outlined the aims of the war. And part of the aims of the war were the 4 freedoms. That is to say, they confirmed the 4 freedoms should be present in every land in the world, and as they fought, that is what they had in mind. Now, we have to stop and pause that he declared these freedoms really in a very, very difficult time. I know what John back there is thinking. I know exactly what he's thinking, because this speech was given on January the 6th, 1941, and there was an incident that occurred on December the 7th, 1941, which we refer to as Pearl Harbor. So the 11 months between the speech and Pearl Harbor were spent in a period of diplomacy, impossible talks with Japan. Japan wanted to claim China. Japan wanted to claim the Philippines, basically to be the master of all Asia. And of course, they could not get our agreement. They sent folks over here to negotiate. We sent folks over there, but it was just an impossible situation. And so the war took place, 2 wars it seemed to us, one on either side, but certainly related. So at this point, I want to discuss these paintings of Norman Rockwell entitled The Four Freedoms. Dixie, will you help me pass these out? Jerry, thank you. Thank you all 3. By the way, I want to dedicate this lesson to my dear wife Dixie, because she's the one who really gave me the idea of the lesson. I want to say that that the Saturday Evening Post is now being published. I was speaking with Don and Lucille earlier. They take it. It comes out every other month. It's not a monthly publication, but every other month. And in it, you will see an awful lot of Norman Rockwell. And one of the nice things about subscribing to the Post is that they send you a calendar, which actually is the way I organize my life. And on each one of these calendars would be a Norman Rockwell painting. So I wanted to mention this to you. Now, what you have there in your hands is something that I consider like a gift from me to you. I had these printed. I wish that I could have had them printed in color, but the cost would have just been prohibitive. But I do have the color up here, and afterwards, if any of you would really like to see these in color, well, please come up here, and I will be just really, really happy to show it to you. Now, I realize that some of you have a hard time reading, and because this print is small. So just briefly, I'm going to run through this first sheet, and then I want us to look at the paintings. Well, it's interesting here that, of course, Roosevelt gave this speech, as I indicated, and Rockwell wanted to contribute to the war effort by creating paintings that depicted each one. So he tried to think, how could I possibly approach this? And all of a sudden, an incident that had happened in his life apparently recently came to mind. He attended one of the famous town hall meetings of New England. And at that meeting, one of the gentlemen stood up and gave a speech. And according to Rockwell, probably no one in the audience agreed with the speaker. But the wonderful thing is that everyone sat there and listened to him. That was the American way. And so he thought, that gives me an idea. If I could paint a painting for each one of these freedoms, so that everyone will understand what we mean by that. So his idea was to create these paintings as posters to raise money for the war effort. So he left his home and took the train down to Washington and went to the office there in Washington to ask the gentleman how he would feel about it. And quite frankly, the Office of War Information was not interested. They just flat turned him down. They thought that was apparently not such a good idea. So he was very discouraged. And then on the way back home, he stopped off in Philadelphia at the offices of the Post, and shared his experience with the editor there, Ben Hibbs. And he said that he thought that the War Office was wrong, and he says, Norman, I want you to paint those four paintings, and we're going to put them on the cover of the Post. So you get busy, drop everything else, just do the 4 freedoms. So Rockwell spent 7 months on these 4 freedoms, and they were published in 4 consecutive issues of the Post, starting in February of '43, accompanied by 4 essays of 4 distinguished writers, Booth Tarkington, Will Durant, Carlos Bulasson, and Stephen Vincent Benet. Well, the paintings were a phenomenal success. The Post received 25,000 reprint requests, and a few months later, the government changed its tune. And in May of '43, the Post and the U.S. Treasury Department launched a joint fundraising campaign, sending the paintings out on a 16-city national tour. More than 1 million people attended the exhibition that raised an astonishing $132 million for the war effort. So, again, these paintings now hang in the Norman Rockwell Museum of Stockbridge, Massachusetts. They capture the freedoms that we enjoy as Americans, cherished ideals that unite us, timeless reminders of what we have and what we might lose. Now, with that background, I want us to look at this first painting. By the way, I was happy with the printing job. That black background there is a blackboard. It's a town meeting, a New England town meeting, possibly in a schoolroom. That's why you might have a blackboard there. And the speaker is standing up speaking. And of course here we're talking about the freedom of speech. Let's read the little caption there. Rockwell started this first painting in the series at least 4 times. He initially depicted an entire town meeting full of people with one man standing up in the center of the crowd talking. But later he felt that there were too many people in the picture, and he altered the composition significantly, tightening the focus on the speaker, now positioned in front of the blackboard, as townspeople listen respectfully to the speaker's words. Now, I hope that we can have some discussion here. I wish that we had a lot more time to discuss them. But nevertheless, as you look at this painting here, this gentleman standing up and speaking at a town hall meeting, do you have any thoughts or impressions whatsoever? Yes, Frank.
He doesn't have a title. There's
That's
no
one of-
thing that the guy, it used to be, the guy in charge is the one with a title.
Well, you know,
He's a common, he's a little, there's a lot of other people sitting there that have titles.
yes, well, you know, that's one of the first things I noticed. I believe looking at this gentleman that he is, well, you might say a blue-collar worker, just a fella in the neighborhood, as you say, he's not dressed in a business suit. And as you can see, that the people around, the two men around him do have ties on. They're probably businessmen, whatever, this sort of a thing. And yet, there he's standing talking, and they're listening to him the American way. Guy?
I don't know how many years ago I read something about this particular picture, and I can't recall exactly the importance, but that sheet of paper in his pocket, there's a story behind that, I think.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
I'd love to know what that would be. If you ever find out, would you let us know?
Yeah.
I think the class would be interested in that. Now, of course, what we're talking about, you know, folks, is the First Amendment. That's what we're talking about. The freedom of speech is the First Amendment. And let's be clear about that. We're not just talking about, as an example, what I'm doing now, standing up, or like this gentleman, standing up and talking to an audience. We're talking about newspapers. We're talking about magazines. We're talking about letters that are sent to your house. We're talking about political campaigns. Yeah, we're talking about that as Americans we are free to express ourselves, whatever the medium. It's a great freedom. And we must always cherish it and protect it. Do we have any more comments? Yes, of course.
It's ironic that
Herb, let's see, I think there's a microphone there.
it's ironic that today there are many places where you can't do this. You'll be shouted down or run off, so we've lost some of this.
Are you talking about in America?
I am.
Yeah. We're talking about in America.
Well, that is a shame, because that's un-American. Thank you for that comment. Okay, let's turn to the next one here. Of course, the freedom of worship. I think the caption is fascinating. It says, the original painting was set in a barber shop with patrons of various races and religions patiently waiting their turns. Well, we have all been there, right? You go out to David's barber shop or wherever you go, and there's a line of fellas sitting over there waiting to have their hair cropped. Something I need to do pretty soon. And that's where he originally had the idea of freedom of worship. I wanted to make the statement that no man should be discriminated against regardless of his race or religion. Ultimately, Rockwell rejected the scene as ambiguous, and instead he finished the composition, group faces and hands, a melange of different cultures, and prayerful contemplation bearing the legend, each according to the dictates of his own conscience. You see that above their heads. Now, the lady to the left-hand side there, as you can see, she is holding her rosary. So you're probably, like me, you're probably going to assume that she's Roman Catholic, and she is worshiping with her rosary. I know many Catholics, and as you know, I used to teach in a Catholic school, and so this here is very much what you would see. The older lady in front of her is simply having her hands up, her aged hands up in prayer. In the color, I think that you can see. I think that you can see the different races a little clearer. And if you want to come up and look at this, you certainly may. But I think that you can see the different races a little clearer. Freedom from worship. What are your thoughts about that? There have been, a lot of places in the world, and there are places today in the world where this does not exist. Roosevelt would not be too happy about this, but in a lot of places, Jerry.
I would suggest, as we look at our Bill of Rights and reflect upon these four freedoms, that freedom of religion is interdependent upon freedom of speech, and therefore they're indivisible. Each of them rises to its own level, as so eloquently described in these paintings, but we must look upon all those Bill of Rights when we reflect on these, because they're endowed here. And I think from a historical standpoint, these freedoms are being threatened around the world. The rise of populism and authoritarianism is going on throughout the world. And so we have to be guarded in what we do in our own country, as well as influence our nation as on others, so that we remain a beacon of light.
Yes, I like that idea. I hope that we never lose the idea that we are a beacon of light to the world. I realize that's a very ideal thought, but it's one that I wish that we could always have. Well, let's flip over now to the next page.
Ken,
yes.
Back here. I really like what Jerry said.
Good.
Jerry, I would add one thing to it. I think that same threat is not only in the world outside of the U.S., but it also could be in the U.S. as well.
Thank you, Bishop. I'm sure you're aware of a lot of things that were not in that way, because you see them even within our own denomination, our own faith. Now those first two were hard for him, and so when he came to this third one, it was comparatively easy. The freedom from want. One of Rockwell's most famous and beloved works, Freedom from Want, became an iconic representation of America's quintessential national holiday, Thanksgiving. To create the scene, he grouped members of his own family and friends around the dinner table for a holiday meal. After two difficult paintings, speech and worship, this one came easy. Mrs. Wheaton, our cook, who's the woman holding that turkey, she cooked it, I painted it, and we ate it. Now, one of the interesting things, by the way, about Rockwell is that, there aren't that many people in Stockbridge. It's not a huge city at all. They said that there were very few people in Stockbridge who didn't end up in one of his paintings over the years.
Ken,
Yes.
when we were up there many years ago,
there were about 5 of his subjects walking around the room. And
Oh, really?
they would point out which
picture they were in. And most of them had been children in the paintings.
Well, isn't that interesting?
I wondered if you all saw any.
Well, no, we didn't. I appreciate your sharing that.
One thing we may all want to do when we look at these is that, and I'm having trouble finding that person, but there's one individual that appeared in all 4 of these.
Oh, really?
That's what I remember researching about this, but I don't see that person, maybe the person in the lower right-hand corner.
Oh, really? Well, I didn't know that. Thank you. Yes, Eleanor?
It looks to me like he is in the lower left-hand corner.
Anyway, that's something for you to think about.
Good, thank you. Well, thank you, Eleanor. I don't know myself. No, unfortunately, we need to rush to the next, but I want to say this freedom of want from want is something we need to work on, right? Because we know that there is hunger all around us. There's hunger in Georgetown. And some of you who work in various activities, and I'm thinking of you personally in activities, and with various groups, you're very much aware of this, more than I am, as an example. But there is an enormous amount of hunger in this country. And the Central Texas Food Bank out of Austin, which provides food to many counties in Central Texas, many counties, is one of our favorite charities, because at least, you know, we're writing a check to help stem hunger.
Kim, note how everyone in that picture is smiling so much at that turkey.
Well, of course, and Thanksgiving really is one of our favorite holidays, right? It's a simple holiday. You know, you don't have to run around and buy gifts and so on. You don't even have to go to church or do anything, really. The only thing you're supposed to do is to sit down at a table and have an outstanding meal. And that's something that most of us really appreciate. Now, the last one, of course, is this matter of freedom from fear. Depicts children oblivious to the mounting conflict in the world, resting safety in a bed as their parents look on. The serenity of the scene is belied by newspapers' bold headline, "Bombing," a reference to the 1940-41 Blitz in London. Rockwell said that the idea he hoped to convey was this: thank God that we can put our children to bed with a feeling of security, knowing that they will not be killed in the night. Actually, this freedom from fear has many ramifications and can lead in various directions, but what he had in mind was freedom from fear of armed aggression. That's really what he had in mind. Because, of course, this bombing of London was just, you know, just a terrible idea that bothered all Americans at the time. Do we have a comment on freedom from fear? Yes, Roger.
All we have to do is turn on our TV and take a look at Damascus.
Would you repeat that?
All we would have to do today is turn on our TV and look at the city of Damascus.
Isn't that the truth?
And the children there.
To think that the president of Syria is doing that to his own people, but he's been doing that for a long time. And what is disheartening is that Russia is supporting it. Another comment, Eleanor?
I'm afraid that not all children are free from fear here in the United States. The ones that are going to schools and see what's going on.
You know, I absolutely knew that someone would make that remark, and if you didn't, I would have been disappointed. Certainly with what's been going on here in the last few days coming out of Florida. Yes, freedom from fear doesn't exist in the minds and hearts of a lot of children. Well, let us thank God that we live in America despite the obvious imperfections and shortcomings that we have as we compare to these four freedoms. And also let us thank God for other countries around the world which provide these four essential human freedoms. And so let us as Americans and as Christians seek to make the freedoms a reality to every citizen, The freedom of speech, the freedom of worship, the freedom from want, the freedom from fear. Amen.
Amen.